My wife said she deserved half of everything, including the company I built before marriage. I calmly presented the prenuptial addendum and business incorporation dates. The court recognized sole ownership. She reached out later when her attorney advised settlement was impossible. Half of everything means half of the company too, and if you think that prenup is going to stop me, you're about to be very disappointed. She said it the way people say things when they've been rehearsing them. Calm, measured, like she'd already won. I remember standing in our kitchen, the one I'd picked out the tiles for, the one where I used to eat cereal standing up at 2 in the morning when I was too deep in spreadsheets to sit down, and I just looked at her. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam anything. I didn't even blink particularly hard. I just said, okay. And that one word, that single syllable, seemed to confuse her more than any argument ever could have. Hey viewers, before we move on to the video, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if you want to see more stories like this. My name doesn't matter here. What matters is this. I was 34 years old, the founder and sole owner of a logistics software company I had built with my own hands, my own savings, and approximately 400 nights of missed sleep between the ages of 26 and 31. I had been married for 3 years. The marriage was ending, and my wife, Vivian, had walked into our kitchen that Tuesday morning with a manila folder, a new attorney's business card, and the absolute conviction that she was about to dismantle everything I had spent a decade constructing. Vivian was not a villain when I met her. I want to be clear about that. She was warm, sharp, funny in the dry way that makes you feel like you've earned something when she laughs at your joke. We met at a conference. Not the kind of conference where people go to find spouses. It was a supply chain optimization summit, which is exactly as romantic as it sounds. But she was presenting a paper on last-mile delivery and efficiencies, and I was in the audience thinking this woman understands the exact problem I've been trying to solve for 2 years. We talked for 6 hours that night. We were married 14 months later. What I didn't know then, or maybe what I knew and chose to interpret charitably, was that Vivian had a very specific idea of what partnership meant. Not equal effort, not shared sacrifice, equal ownership of outcome, regardless of what she put in. That distinction sounds small until it isn't. The company, I'll call it NOV Path, because that's what it was called, was incorporated nearly 5 years before I met Vivian. I started it when I was 26, in a 2-bedroom apartment in Portland with a laptop that had a cracked screen held together by electrical tape and a lot of misplaced confidence. My initial capital was $42,000. $11,000 of that was a personal loan from my older brother Derek. The rest was money I had saved working back-to-back years at a logistics firm where I averaged 60-hour weeks and ate a lot of frozen dinners. NOV Path was mine before Vivian ever knew my last name. When we got engaged, I was upfront about this. I said, I have a business. It was built before you. I love you, and I want to build a life with you, but I need the business to stay protected because too many people depend on it, and too much of myself is in it. She said she understood. She said she didn't care about the company, that she had her own career, her own ambitions. She signed the prenuptial agreement without much fuss. Or, more precisely, without the fuss I expected. There was an afternoon of quiet, and then she signed it, and we moved on. What I didn't fully appreciate at the time was what, without much fuss, can sometimes mean. The prenuptial agreement was thorough. My attorney, a meticulous woman named Claire who charged more per hour than I liked to think about, but had never once given me reason to doubt her, had spent weeks on it. The agreement specified NOV Path as premarital separate property. It listed the incorporation date. It attached the original articles of incorporation as an exhibit. It outlined that any organic growth of the business during the marriage, revenue increases, new contracts, expansion, would not convert the company into marital property simply by virtue of time elapsed. Claire had also done something I hadn't specifically asked for, but would come to thank her for every single day of my life. She added what she called a prenuptial addendum, a secondary document, executed separately, notarized, and filed with the court at the time of our marriage. It detailed the valuation of NOV Path at the time of the wedding, $7.2 million, audited and certified. It outlined the ownership structure, 100% mine. It specified that any claim to the company would require Vivian to demonstrate direct financial contribution to the principal business entity itself, not to the household, not to the marriage, not to my life in general. Direct, financial, contribution to the principal business entity. I remember Claire sliding that page across the desk and saying, This is the part that will matter most if things ever go wrong. I remember nodding and not really believing things would go wrong. The first 3 years of marriage were, honestly, mostly fine. We had a good life. We bought a house, a real house, not an apartment, in a part of the city that had excellent coffee shops and bad parking. Vivian advanced in her career. I grew the company. We argued the way most couples argue, about dishes, about vacation planning, about whose turn it was to deal with the internet provider when the service went down. Normal friction. Marriage friction. The kind that feels annoying but also somehow confirms that you're actually living a shared life with another person. The shift happened gradually and then all at once, which I think is how most important things happen in relationships. Vivian started making comments about the company around the 2-year mark. Not aggressive comments. Just observations. You know, if I had input on the product direction, I think the user interface could be significantly better. Have you thought about what happens to NOV path if something happens to you? I should probably be more involved. The company takes up so much of our life. I feel like I've sacrificed a lot for it without any real stake. That last one stopped me. I asked her to elaborate. She said she meant that she'd compromised her own career trajectory to support mine. I pointed out, gently, that she had not compromised her career trajectory in any way that I could identify. She had been promoted twice, had taken on new projects, had turned down nothing that I knew of. She said I didn't fully understand the invisible weight she carried. I said I wanted to understand it. She went quiet, and then said she was just tired and we dropped it. But we didn't really drop it. It just went underground, the way things do. I started noticing her asking questions about NOV path that weren't casual. Detailed questions. Revenue questions. Client questions. How much did that government contract add to annual revenue? What's the current equity valuation if you were to sell tomorrow? Who else has ownership rights in the company? Nobody, I told her. Just me. She'd look at me when I said that. Not angry exactly. More like someone calculating. The summer before everything broke apart, Vivian started meeting with someone I didn't recognize. Not secretly. She mentioned it openly. She said she was having coffee with a friend who works in corporate law. I filed it away. I probably should have filed it more carefully. The manila folder appeared in November. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind of gray sky Tuesday that Portland specializes in, and she walked into the kitchen where I was on my second coffee, and she set the folder on the counter between us. She said, "I've been talking to an attorney. I think we need to discuss what a fair dissolution of this marriage would look like." Dissolution. She used that word. Not divorce. Not separation. Dissolution. Like the marriage was a compound she was looking to break down into its parts. I said, "Okay, what does that look like to you?" She opened the folder. Inside were several documents I'd never seen before. The top one appeared to be a legal memorandum, and skimming it, even upside down, I could see it was arguing that NOV path had appreciated significantly during the marriage and that she had contributed to the household in ways that allowed me to focus on growing the business, which constituted indirect contribution to the marital estate. Half of everything, she said. That includes NOV path? Especially NOV path. I looked at her. You've read the prenup, Vivian. My attorney says the prenup doesn't account for the value I added to the marital estate. It doesn't account for the career sacrifices. It doesn't account for the appreciation of a premarital asset during the marriage. There's case law. There is, in fact, case law on this. There are arguments, sometimes successful arguments, that when a spouse contributes meaningfully to the growth of a premarital business asset, courts can reassign partial ownership or award compensatory payments. Vivian's attorney had done their homework. The problem was that the homework didn't account for Claire's addendum, and it definitely didn't account for me. I said, "I'm going to need you to let me talk to my attorney before we continue this conversation." She said, "Of course." She was pleasant about it. She was pleasant about it in the way that people are pleasant when they think the outcome is already settled in their favor. I called Claire that afternoon. I told her what Vivian had said. Claire was quiet for about 4 seconds, which, in Claire's silence, is the equivalent of someone else making a noise of disbelief. And then she said, "She's going to argue indirect contribution and marital appreciation." That's what the memo suggested. Does she have documentation of any direct financial contribution to NOV path? Loans to the company? Capital injections? Signed contracts she negotiated on behalf of the entity? No. Did she work for NOV path in any formal capacity? No. Did she have any ownership stake that was ever formally documented? No. Then we're fine, Claire said. Send me everything you have. All your original incorporation documents, the addendum, the certified valuation from your wedding year. I'll pull the company financials from our records. I sent everything that night. What followed was 4 months of legal process that I will not pretend was easy. Even when you know you're right, even when the documentation is clean, even when your attorney has the quiet confidence of someone who has done this 100 times before, it is not easy to sit across a conference table from someone you married and watch them argue that what you built doesn't fully belong to you. Vivian's attorney was a man named Colin. Polished, aggressive in the methodical way that expensive attorneys tend to be. He presented a theory of the case that was genuinely creative. He argued that Vivian's emotional and domestic support during the marriage had freed up my cognitive and time resources to grow NOVPath, and that the company's revenue had increased 310% during the marriage, which was true, and that this appreciation was therefore partially attributable to her contribution. It was a sophisticated argument, but it had a critical flaw. Claire requested that Colin produce any documentation showing Vivian's direct contribution to NOVPath, not to the household, not to the marriage, to the principal business entity. Those exact words from the addendum. Colin produced household expense records. He produced testimony from Vivian about meals she had cooked, events she had hosted, social engagements she had managed. Claire let him finish. Then she laid the prenuptial addendum on the table. She pointed to the clause. She said, direct financial contribution to the principal business entity, not to the household, not to the marriage, the business entity. Can you point me to a single document that shows any such contribution? Colin was quiet. Because I have the company's complete financial records going back 11 years, Claire continued. I have every capital contribution documented. I have every ownership record. Not a single one includes your client. Then she placed the incorporation date documents on the table. Then the certified valuation from our wedding year. Then the growth analysis showing that NOVPath's expansion was driven by 2 major government contracts and a product pivot, both of which were in development before Vivian and I were even engaged. Colin looked at his papers. Then he looked at Vivian. Then he said they needed a recess. I sat in the hallway during that recess. There's a particular kind of silence that happens in legal proceedings when momentum shifts. It's not dramatic. There are no gasping witnesses or shouted revelations. It's just a heaviness, a recalibration. I drank bad coffee from a styrofoam cup and stared at the beige wall and thought about the cracked screen laptop and the frozen dinners and the $42,000 and the apartment in Portland and all those 2 in the morning cereal moments. I thought, that was mine. All of that was mine. And it still is. The court ultimately recognized sole ownership. That's the clinical way to say it. The judge reviewed the prenuptial agreement, the addendum, the incorporation documents, the certified valuations, the company financial records, and the absence of any documentation showing Vivian's direct financial contribution to NOVPath. The ruling was, in legal terms, straightforward. The business was premarital separate property. The addendum had specifically anticipated and foreclosed the marital appreciation argument. There was no grounds for reclassification. Sole ownership confirmed. The rest of the divorce, the house, the shared accounts, the car, was handled as you'd expect. We split what was genuinely shared equitably. I didn't fight about the dining room furniture. I didn't argue about the kitchen table. I let things go that could be let go, because the thing that mattered had been protected and everything else was just stuff. Vivian got a fair settlement of the actual marital assets. She just didn't get the company. I want to pause here because I've noticed, when I tell this story, that people sometimes assume I was cold through all of this. Calculated. Strategic in a way that implies I never actually cared. That's not accurate. There were nights during those 4 months where I sat alone in the house we used to share. She had moved out by then, and felt the specific grief of a marriage that had seemed real and then had become something else. I grieved Vivian. Not the Vivian with the manila folder and Colin the attorney. The Vivian from the conference. The one who understood last-mile delivery inefficiencies. The one who laughed dry and earned. I grieved that version of her. I just couldn't let grief make me stupid. She called me 8 months after the ruling. Not immediately. 8 months. I had moved into a smaller place by then. A clean apartment downtown that had good light in the mornings and no memories embedded in the walls. I was working again the way I used to work before marriage. Completely, fully, with the particular freedom of someone who has clarified what matters. My phone buzzed with her name on a Wednesday afternoon. I stared at it for a moment. Then I answered. I wanted to talk, she said. Her voice was different. Not the measured voice from the kitchen with the manila folder. Quieter, like something had been wrung out of it. Okay, I said. Colin told me to reach out. He said a private settlement might be possible even after the ruling. He said there might be grounds for. Vivian. She stopped. Your attorney is calling this a settlement conversation, I said. Is that what this is? Silence. Because if it is, I continued, you need to call Claire. I'm not having that conversation directly. That's what attorneys are for. That's not. I mean, that's part of it. But I also just. Another pause. I wanted to hear your voice, she said. And I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't hang up. That's probably the most honest thing I can tell you. Some part of me, the part that had grieved the conference version of her, didn't hang up. How are you? I asked. Not great, she said. I'm sorry. Are you? Yes, I said, and meant it. I'm sorry the marriage ended the way it ended. I'm sorry it ended at all. You could have given me something, she said quietly. Even a small stake. It wouldn't have bankrupted you. It wasn't about the money, Vivian. Then what was it about? I thought about how to answer that. It was about the fact that I built that company alone, I said. I built it before I knew you. I built it in years that were genuinely hard in ways that you didn't see those years. You met me after the hard part. And I couldn't hand over half of something I earned entirely on my own, not because I didn't love you, but because it would have meant that what I did alone didn't count. She was quiet. That sounds like it was about your ego, she said. Maybe partly, I said. But it was also just true. It was mine. And the documents confirmed it was mine. And I wasn't going to pretend otherwise. She tried once more after that. Not through Colin this time. Apparently Colin had confirmed, based on his own review, that any further legal attempt to claim NOV path would be unsuccessful and potentially expose her to cost sanctions. So she wrote me an email. It was long, several hundred words. The first half was an argument, a softer version of the same theory Colin had presented about the value she had added to the household, the way she had supported the life that allowed me to run the company. The second half was something different. The second half was the closest thing to an honest conversation we'd had in probably a year. She wrote about the conference. She wrote about the first 6 months when we were still just talking, still just figuring out whether this was going somewhere. She wrote that she had genuinely believed, when she signed the prenuptial agreement, that it would never become relevant. She wrote, I didn't sign it because I accepted it. I signed it because I thought we'd never get to the point where it mattered. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about a lot of things. I read that line several times. I drafted 4 different responses to that email. The first was cold. The second was warm and probably unwise. The third was 3 paragraphs of legal exposition that Claire would have approved of, but that Vivian didn't need. The fourth was what I actually sent. It was short. I said, I believe that you believe that. I also think that at some point in the last year of the marriage, something shifted in how you saw what you deserved versus what you had actually built together with me. I don't know what caused that shift. I'm not sure it matters now. I wish you well, Vivian. I genuinely do. Please don't contact me again unless it's through our attorneys and for a specific legal purpose. She didn't respond. That was the last communication we had. I told my brother Derek about all of this over dinner about a month later. Derek is the person who lent me $11,000 when I was 26 and didn't ask for it back until I could comfortably give it, and then he tried not to take it at all. He's the kind of person who makes you feel like you're doing okay, even when you're not. He listened to the whole story, the kitchen confrontation, the legal process, the phone call, the email. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You know what I kept thinking about while you were telling that story? What? The cracked laptop. I laughed. He laughed. She never saw the cracked laptop years, he said. She saw the result. And I think she confused the result with her own involvement in it. Yeah, I said. A lot of people do that, he said. It doesn't make them evil. It makes them human. People tend to expand their sense of contribution to match the outcome they feel entitled to. That's a generous way of seeing it. It's the true way of seeing it, he said. Being generous and being true aren't always different things. I thought about that. I still think about it. NOV Path, as of the year after the divorce, had crossed the $11 million annual revenue mark. I know that because I was there for it. Every year of it. Every early morning and late night and difficult client call and product pivot and hiring decision and near miss and eventual success. I was there for all of it, and I was alone for most of it. And that's not a complaint. It's just the nature of building something from nothing. You are the first person in, usually for a long time. And if you've done it, you know there's something sacred about that. Not special, not superior, Just yours. In a way that nothing can fully transfer away from you, even if it tries. I've thought a lot about what made the marriage fracture the way it did. I've thought about whether there was something I missed early on, some warning sign I dismissed because I was charmed and busy. The honest answer is probably yes. There was a version of the kitchen conversation that could have happened much earlier. A version where we talked honestly about what each of us expected from a shared life, about what fairness actually means when one partner comes into the marriage with significantly more built assets. We didn't have that conversation early enough. We had the prenuptial agreement instead, which answered the legal question but not the emotional one. The emotional question, I think, was this: did she feel like she mattered? Not to the company, to me. And I'm not certain I handled that as well as I should have. I was good at building. I was less good at making someone feel like they were part of something. Even when that something wasn't legally theirs, it could have been emotionally theirs in ways that I didn't always offer. I'm not sure that would have saved the marriage. I'm not even sure it would have been worth saving if it required me to pretend that NOV Path was built by two people when it was built by one. But I do think, if I'm being fully honest, that the marriage might have lasted longer and ended cleaner if I'd been better at the human part of it. A guy I know named Owen. He runs a competing firm. We've always had a friendly rivalry. Heard about the divorce through the industry and called me about 2 weeks after everything was finalized. He said, "I heard about the legal stuff. You okay?" I said I was. He said, "Did she really try to claim the company?" "Through her attorney, yes." He was quiet. Then he said, "Man, I had a business attorney tell me once, protect the asset before anyone tells you to protect it." He said the people who end up in trouble are the ones who think love is a substitute for documentation. He wasn't wrong, I said. "Did you have everything in order?" "I did." "Because of love or because of documentation?" I thought about that. "Both," I said. I trusted her, but I also trusted Claire. "That's the right answer," Owen said. "That's exactly the right answer." Claire, for her part, never said "I told you so." She's not that kind of attorney. When the ruling came through, she called me, told me briefly and clearly what had been decided, confirmed that the sole ownership recognition was final and that Vivian's legal team had no viable grounds for appeal, and then asked if I needed anything else. I told her she had been extraordinary. She said she'd done her job. I sent her flowers anyway. She sent back a brief note that said, "The addendum was always the key. I'm glad we built it when we did." I kept that note. There's a particular kind of person who, when they hear this story, wants to make Vivian a monster. They want a villain arc. They want greed and calculation and some early moment where she reveals she was never genuine. I can't give them that, because it wouldn't be honest. What I actually believe is that Vivian loved me, or a version of me, for a significant portion of our time together. I believe the shift was gradual, driven by something that felt to her like injustice, a gap between what she expected partnership to look like and what it actually looked like. I believe she convinced herself, over time, that she had contributed to what I'd built in ways that justified a claim on it. And I believe the person who came into the kitchen with the manila folder genuinely felt righteous. That's almost worse than scheming, in a way, because righteousness is harder to negotiate with than calculation. But the documentation didn't care about her righteousness. The incorporation date was the incorporation date. The certified valuation was the certified valuation. The addendum was the addendum. Facts, as Claire once told me, are remarkably patient. They just sit there. They don't argue. They don't get emotional. They don't need to be louder than the other side. They just exist, and when the right moment comes, they speak for themselves. I've been in the apartment downtown for almost a year now. The light is good in the mornings. I make coffee properly now, the kind that takes longer and tastes better. I work. I run. I've started cooking real food instead of the frozen dinners from the early NOV Path years, which I think is progress. Some evenings I sit at the window with whatever I'm working on and the city is loud in that low humming way that cities are when they're just being themselves, and I think about how much of what I value in my life I built before anyone else was watching. There's something clarifying about that. Not isolating. Clarifying. I'm telling you this story because I get asked about it. By people who are starting businesses and getting married. By people who are already married and feel a creeping uncertainty about what would happen if things went wrong. By people who've been through something similar and want to feel less alone in it. Here is what I would tell each of them. Love is real, and it should be honored. Partnership is real, and it should be fair. But love and legal reality are not the same thing. And believing that love renders legal reality unnecessary is a beautiful thought that will, in certain circumstances, cost you everything. Document what you built before someone else arrived. Not because you expect the worst. Not because you don't trust the person you love. Document it because what you built on your own deserves to be recognized as what it is, yours. That recognition isn't a statement about the relationship. It's a statement about the truth. And when the truth is clear and documented and certified and notarized and filed with a court, it holds. Against arguments. Against emotion. Against a manila folder on a Tuesday morning. It holds. The last thing I want to tell you about is a moment that happened at the company. About 3 months after the ruling. I was in the office, a real office now, 23 employees, actual conference rooms with glass walls and plants that someone else waters. And one of my younger team members, a junior developer named Felix, caught me in the hallway. Felix is 24. He has the specific energy of someone who hasn't been beaten down yet, which I find both exhausting and deeply encouraging. He said, "Can I ask you something personal?" I said he could try. He said, "Is it true you built this company yourself?" Like, before it was anything. Before it was anything, I confirmed. What was that like? I thought about it. Honestly, it was mostly just eating bad food and being tired and not knowing if any of it was going to work. He laughed. But you kept going. I kept going. Why? I thought about the cracked laptop. I thought about Derek's $11,000. I thought about the frozen dinners and the 2 a.m. cereal and the 400 nights. Because it was mine, I said. And that meant I was the only one who could decide whether to stop. Felix nodded slowly, like he was filing something away. That's the part people don't talk about enough, he said. What part? The ownership part, not the money part. The, "this is mine, I decide" part. Yeah, I said. That's the part. I didn't decide to stop. NOV Path turned 12 years old this year. 12 years since the cracked laptop. 12 years since the frozen dinners. 7 years since Colin put his documents on the conference table and Claire put hers. 3 years since the kitchen with the manila folder. 1 year since the apartment with the good morning light. The company is still mine. All of it. Every percentage point, every contract, every line of code that started on that cracked screen and eventually became something that 23 people show up to work on every day. All mine. And no document ever disputed that, because I had a document that said otherwise. There's one more thing. About a month ago, I was going through old files, not legal files, just old personal files I'd been putting off sorting, and I found something I had completely forgotten about. A photograph. Not digital. An actual physical photograph, the kind that comes from a disposable camera, which I had apparently used at some point in the early NOV Path years because I have no memory of doing so. It was a photo of my first office, which was, of course, the 2-bedroom apartment. Specifically, the 2nd bedroom, which I had converted into a workspace. There was the desk, a door on 2 sawhorses. There was the laptop with the cracked screen. There were papers everywhere, scattered in the specific chaotic pattern of someone who was making something up as they go. And there was me, sitting at the sawhorse desk at what the photo's timestamp said was 11:47 at night. Not looking at the camera, looking at the screen. I don't remember who took that photo. I don't know how I ended up with it. But I sat with it for a long time. I looked at that person, me, but not the me who has the good light apartment and the 23 employees and the $11 million revenue year. And I thought, that person had no idea, had absolutely no idea what was coming. The growth, the marriage, the conference table, the ruling, the morning light, all of it completely invisible from that late night spot at the sawhorse desk. And still, he was building it. Not for the future validation of a court ruling, not as protection against a future wife, not for any reason except that it was his and he believed in it, and it was the only thing he knew how to do with his hands at 11:47 at night when the rest of the world was asleep. That's the thing nobody tells you about building something. You don't build it knowing what it will become. You build it because you can't imagine not building it. And then one day it exists, and it has a name, and it has a value, and it has a legal definition, and it has a court ruling attached to it. And underneath all of that, underneath all the documents and the dates and the addendums and the certified valuations, it still just is what it was at 11:47 at night in a 2-bedroom apartment. Something you made, with your hands, on your own, before anyone was watching. That's the whole story. Everything else is just paperwork.